Talking Drupal. This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from three groups of guys, or actually one group of three guys, with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We're recording this again on a Wednesday afternoon in a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 97, June 17th, 2015. Today we're going to talk about blocking unwanted users.
Good morning. How you doing?
Hey, guys. Yeah, we're recording. We usually record this at 1 p.m. We're recording a little bit early today, so anyone who is looking for the stream a bit earlier, and we do usually have a couple of live listeners, sorry that we went a little early today. You know, sometimes we have to do business, right? And things get in the way. So we're recording early. So welcome, John Picozzi from Oomph.
Good morning.
Yes, it is still
three
morning.
Three more minutes.
Exactly. How are you, John?
I'm great.
That's good.
Busy.
Yeah, that's a good thing. We also have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design.
How you doing? Yeah, I just wanted to say that each of us had a nice chance this weekend to celebrate your 25th anniversary, right? So it was a good time. Everybody from the Talking Drupal alum podcast was there as well.
Yeah, it was a good time. Thank you guys for coming. It's my 25th wedding anniversary next Wednesday, I think, and my two lovely daughters managed to put together a surprise party for us that included family and friends, and you guys were included in that. It was really awesome to have you guys there. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we had a good time, and I'm still astounded that your lovely wife has put up with you for 25 years.
Yeah, I am too, right? And like I said when I was talking that night is, the next 25 years, I don't know, you guys might be celebrating with somebody else at the 50th.
Well, you'll be there. You'll just be in your urn.
Oh, is that what it'll be? Okay. I'll either die or have been replaced or both. Yeah.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Nick, that is so far away, right? You've been married 2 years?
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, thank you guys for coming. It was a huge surprise and a good time. So let's move on to our topic for today, which is a good one and a bad one all at the same time. It's how do you block unwanted users from your Drupal site? We've touched on this topic a little bit, I think, in a number of different episodes where we may have mentioned some of these tools and techniques, but we've never actually talked about this in general, is to say, hey, you built a website and there's going to be people at some point that are trying to get into that website that you don't want in there, and how do you get rid of them? That's what the show is about. So
shutting it off is not an appropriate solution?
That is the most effective one, actually. Yeah. Just shut the website down. It's the most effective one for getting rid of unwanted users. The problem is that gets rid of the wanted ones as well.
Well, I mean, you guys are obviously joking, but occasionally shutting off public user registration is a viable solution. If it's a website that doesn't have a community around it, and it's just the people that are managing the website are the business folk in the company, then many times shutting off public user registration is the solution. And unless there's a business need for public registration, that's on my launch checklist to shut that off, because you will have random spam users if you don't shut that off, and it's just not worth the hassle of protecting if there's no need for them.
So unwanted users come from different places. Like the one you're talking about right now, Nick, is registrations. Is that if you have the registration page active to the public, there's no doubt that at some point in time that page is going to get found and abused. But there's other places too, even if you don't have a registration page, that you're looking for user input. So through forums is another place that you can easily be abused by what we're calling today unwanted users. People coming to your website that their intent is not to engage with you in an appropriate way, but to use you and abuse you. So those are the kinds of people we want to get away to.
Definitely. And there's the most typical type of form. The two most common forms in Drupal are web forms that you've set up and the user registration or user login form. But there are a couple of different other forms that are occasionally exposed. Probably the third most prominent, although personally my clients don't use it very much, is the comments form. And they're sometimes a little bit different to protect because they're kind of their own entity. They're not, the typical. They don't follow the typical Drupal structure. And then the next kind is, actual content types, whether that's a forum or, on many of my clients' websites, you need to expose a node form to the public in order to get some information so that it can be displayed nicely in a view, and that that kind of form really needs to be protected as well.
So we have. There's also. I was just going to say, there's also the instance where, you have a call out to an API, and I know, when we were talking about this topic, Steve had brought this issue up, and then it kind of spiraled into this. What if you're using an API like Google Maps or a geolocation service on your website, and you have people that are abusing that for their own, whether they're just taking the information and using it in their own database or however they're going about doing that. That's another section of users that, for all intents and purposes, you should be blocking because they're abusing your site. They're racking up your API calls, and that can be detrimental to users that are using the site correctly.
So we have users that we've invited via a form, whether it be registration or a contact us form. So when you build the site, you're inviting people to fill that out, and that can be abused. We have situations where you have content or functionality in your site that people, even anonymous users, are using in a way that it wasn't intended to use. Like maybe it's scraping content from you, or it could be anything like that. And those kinds of users you don't want as well. And then we get this just general like DDoS kind of hacker people that aren't necessarily coming for content, but for whatever reason they're trying to disrupt your service in some way. And maybe those are the most evil ones of all. I'm not sure which one is worse.
Yeah, and then there's one final kind of category that some people would consider. I know that even when we were discussing the show, some people agree and some people don't agree. The final kind of category is on a subscription-based website, when a subscription lapses, you still want to retain that user and capture them again as a customer, as a paying customer, but there are certain sections of the site where they become an unwanted user if that's part of the services. So you certainly have to plan for, if you have an access-based site with subscriptions, what happens when a subscription lapses, and how do you handle revoking permissions.
So those are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about a bit today. So let's drop into one first. First question is, how do you discover these? Like, how do you discover, what are some of the tip-offs to you as there's something happening on your website that might direct you to you have unwanted users?
Analytics, I would say, would be the biggest one, besides the obvious, hey, there are 150 users on my website that, there only should be 5, and they should all be admin users and not have these weird email addresses. Or my web form should not have this many submissions because it just isn't, it's not that popular.
So John, you just said a whole bunch of stuff in like one sentence, right?
Yeah. So
a spike in traffic is exciting often for website owners, but might not necessarily be an indication of success of the website, right?
Yeah, it's exciting for website owners and horrifying for the security analysts and the people that are trying to keep your site secure. a lot of times you'll know if there's going to be a spike in traffic to your website. Whether you're doing some sort of PR campaign, or you have you've been mentioned somewhere that a lot of people are seeing. So a spike in traffic that is out of the blue or is a surprise to you should probably be looked at from the standpoint of, is there something going on here that's not just, hey, this has just become an internet meme, or it's a Tuesday and everybody wants to go to my website for some reason.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So be suspicious of unplanned spikes of traffic, right?
Absolutely.
Be suspicious. Yeah, that's a great point. Don't just assume that all of a sudden you've become a meme on the internet, right?
Yep. So I mean, I personally think that the two primary ways that you discover it, usually it's performance, because usually problem users aren't just a couple here and there. Usually, once a problem user outlet discovers your website, it's, hey, let's send 40,000 users at once. And usually, the first way you discover that there's 40,000 people registering your website is the website is a little slow, and then
or non-responsive,
or unresponsive entirely. And then the first thing to do is start looking at the quality of the submissions. Whether it's a web form or a node form or a user form, visually scanning those and seeing if they're valid responses.
So probably a website that gets, let's just use a contact us form, that might get 10 contact us form submissions a week, suddenly has 10 in one day, and they're all from a Yahoo address. That should be raising a concern to you in terms of something, and it could be legitimate, but the chances are that you need to look at it closely. So it's a spike in that kind of thing, and then looking at the content specifically.
Absolutely.
So what are there any other indicators? So we've got some performance things. How would the performance things come up? Is that someone reports to you? So when someone's reporting that, hey, the website seems slow, or is it that we have some tools that we have in place that are monitoring performance?
Yeah, there are tools that you can use. A lot of times it depends on the size of the site. So for some of our bigger sites, we actually have New Relic running, and they're doing analysis of traffic and resources and those sorts of things. For the smaller sites, it's really just kind of, oh, hey, I went to the website and it was slow, or logging into your control panel. I know MediaTemple has a resources monitor that you can actually look at. It's basically a graph that'll show you how your resources are being used, and you can tell. Normally, in your, I know for my personal server that my server runs at about 44% memory utilization. If I see anything that's higher than that, there's something going on. Whether it's spam email going out, or my website's being pinged by a million people, whatever it is. I can say, okay, this is abnormal. I need to look into it further. So there are tools out there. Word of mouth is also a big one, where if somebody says, oh, I went to your website and it was really slow, or oh, I went to your website and I got this error message, they send you a screenshot.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with most of that, except for one particular point. So, there are services out there that I use that will notify me if any of my clients' websites go down. I use servercheck.in, and it's generally very good. Although there's one site that I tend to get false positives on occasionally, but it's better to get a false positive than have a site go down and not know it. But that way, if a site goes down, I get a text message, I get an email, and I can certainly start looking into it. I use New Relic for a couple of sites, but as you said, it's generally cost prohibitive. So it's not something that you just use on every single website. But my personal experience with New Relic is that they have so many false positives, it just becomes noise. For example, I have a client that's using it, and I had to shut off the notifications because I would get 10 to 15 notifications every single day saying that app performance is really low. And after a year and a half of looking at the site and not once having it load slower than a second and never seeing server utilization above 20%, even under heavy load, it just isn't useful. And I certainly, you can tweak those settings, and I set it to not tell me unless the site was taking longer than 5 seconds to load, and it just I still got 10 notifications a day. So your mileage may vary. Could be misconfiguration on my part. That's very, very possible. But I found that New Relic sent me 15, 20 emails a day.
Well, Nick, there's a big point there in that notifications that become noise are not notifications whatsoever. I mean, that's a huge problem. Yeah. So whether it's your configuration or New Relic or whatever, but I mean, notifications really in these kind of scenarios that we're talking about today should be very clear and very specific, and not become noise, because then it's completely defeats the purpose.
Exactly.
So you start to get to what you prefer to do instead. I'm not sure you finished that.
Yeah. So I don't typically have performance monitoring per se, but I do have a service that pings my websites and tells me if they're down.
Right.
And you can certainly set them up to ping. You can set a short enough time that if it's slow, it will count as down as well. And I use, like I said, server check-in for that.
And one of the things that John mentioned that I think is so important is to listen to customer feedback. And I was totally guilty of this in the past week, that we had a customer complaining about an issue on our website for us, and based on the person that was complaining, I was brushing it off and saying, hey, this person's a complainer, and this is like typical of their fashion. And Jay was pretty quick. Jay in my company was pretty quick to say, hey, well, let's just look at this a little closer. Let's not let's not like damper or fuzz out our interpretation of what they're saying based on who they are, but let's look at it. And then we did find a problem. So sometimes you need to just listen to the people who are using the site, and sometimes it's always easy to just dismiss it, but maybe you should take that extra second to just double check it, because they're the ones who get a feel for if there's something wrong, that they'll be the ones who tell you first. And oftentimes maybe what the description wasn't spot on, maybe the direction they were heading in or the way they delivered the message didn't work well, but oftentimes it's really rooted in some sort of real issue. So don't ignore that. I think that's a great pulse for something happening in terms of discovery of unwanted users, which we're trying to talk about right now. So, all right, so we're looking at performance changes, increase in traffic, complaints from users or customers of the website. Is there anything else in terms of discovery that would be ping points for you guys? How about error logs?
Yeah, you could error logs or the watchdog logs are can be a useful way to diagnose these problems. The other thing I'm thinking about, and going back to one issue I know Steve's had, is if a service is sending you a message or alerting you that you've reached your max amount of uses of their API or whatever the case may be there. There are services out there that have a certain amount of uses. Google being probably one of the biggest, and they'll send it. I don't actually know if Google sends you a notification to tell you this. I'm pretty sure that they do. And
no, actually, Google just shuts you off.
They don't even send you an email.
They don't even send you, dear John.
No,
Like, oh,
yeah, there's
sorry.
no heads up. There's a, hey, I'm calling the API, and I'm not going to give you what you asked for. So here's an error message.
So another service that does actually send you kind of reports on activity regularly, not just when there's a problem, is Mandrill, where I'm actually using Mandrill for a client of mine, and I can tell based on, okay, they usually get between 5 to 10 emails a week. If that number increases or doubles or triples, and I call them and go, hey, is there a reason for this? And they say no, then there's a problem there. There's something going on that's not supposed to be going on. So there are other methods for figuring out if something's going on that are not just looking at your website or talking to your clients.
So I think there's a summary here in that, as I'm listening to the things we've mentioned, in that the signs are usually there, right? That something's going awry. The question is, are you watching for the signs?
You just got to be heads up, and you got to say, okay, there's something weird going on here. And analytics is any analytical data, not just Google Analytics, but any analytical data is something that you need to analyze.
And personally, I don't use Google Analytics. I don't think is useful in a crisis moment, because analytics is typically 24 hours behind. But it's very good to see historical data and see if what you're seeing currently is normal or not. Especially, because many times in this kind of situation, you're sometimes getting people that aren't your clients. They're somebody who had a site built a few years ago, and all of a sudden they're having a major issue, and they're reaching out to you because you're a Drupal developer. So it's not always a long-standing client when you're trying to solve these problems. So you do need to do some of that historical research, and Google Analytics is perfect for that.
And oftentimes a host provider can provide you real-time activity on your website too. So if you're hosting with someone who gives you real-time statistics, I know that MediaTemple does. But I think I'm not sure how specifically accurate it is, but I think it gives you general good information. Is if you log into your MediaTemple account and you look at the current stats for the server, you can see real-time. What is my CPU, what is my memory, and what's the last category there? It's
load.
The load. So if you have a load that went up to 10,000% in the last 30 minutes, then that's an indication to you that something's going on. I mean, that load information in terms of a spike is very helpful, or in memory or CPU or that kind of thing. So
yeah, I actually used that not too long ago to look at my server stats over the course of 6 months, and you could see that for some reason my server stats had spiked like out of control. I was using basically 100% of my server's memory, and turns out that the server was sending out spam, which was not good. So corrected that, and it just kind of fell right back down to where it should be. And now if you look at it, you can see that 6 months ago there was a spike for a week, and then it's now leveled back off to being in the normal range. So that tool is very helpful, I think.
Fascinating. Yeah, you're looking at the symptoms and then trying to figure out what the underlying problem is. All right, so let's talk a little bit about strategies to deal with unwanted users, and I think this comes in the form of like what modules can you use. I think that's kind of how we approach this.
Could we maybe start at the server level?
Absolutely.
I think that's like, depending on what's going on, it may be wise to block IPs at the server level or at the networking level, so those requests don't even get to Drupal and get to your server. Sometimes it's easier just to do it through Drupal, but you have to realize that if you're seeing a malicious request come in or a request you don't want from an IP address time after time, even Drupal handling that request and denying that user is taking up resources on your server. If you can block it before it gets to your server, that's a better solution in my opinion.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to do that. On your server, you can certainly add firewall rules, and you can, if you're getting hammered from a specific IP address, you can ban that IP address, and that will prevent Drupal from bootstrapping to determine if that IP needs to be blocked or not. You can also add a web application firewall in between your server and the outside world. And the most commonly used product here is CloudFlare, and that CloudFlare will handle the DNS, and if it determines that the traffic is suspicious, will block it before it even gets sent to your server.
There's actually, I believe, a show where we talked about that, so you can check that out. I do not know the show number off the top of my head, but you should listen to all of our shows if you haven't already.
TalkingDrupal.com, go find that show.
There you go. Shameless plug. So yeah, once you get one of those solutions in place, it can definitely be helpful to blocking known, malicious users as well as ones you may find as your website goes on. But if you don't want to jump into the network solution, or maybe you want those users that are supposed to be getting denied to, I don't know, redirect to a page that says, hey, stop using my website. I don't know. You could do it at the application level or on the Drupal level.
So before we move away from that, I just want to get your thoughts a minute on what someone should or should not be doing, because you just said, John, if you don't want to do that on a network level, like what would be the reason to not do that on a network level? I'm just wondering out loud here in terms of, you got a commercial, we're assuming not a personal blog, but a commercial website for a company. Why would you not want to block something at the network level and do anything you can there first? Like, to stop the stuff from coming to your website?
That's a great question.
Is it cost?
I would say it's probably inexperience.
Right. It's not a cost thing, right? It's inexperience.
Yeah, I mean the cost is kind of negligible if you know how to do it, or you have a service level agreement with your hosting provider and they can help you out with that. You can definitely go that route.
So what could you do though in that scenario? What is something someone could do that their hosting provider can provide them with?
As far as blocking IP addresses, or
what's the approach to that?
So,
or do you go the outside service like Nick mentioned with?
I would tend to go with an outside service like Cloudflare, because if you're not familiar with setting up, virtual host rules and doing stuff at the server level, your hosting provider will give you tutorials on how to do that. So if you want to learn, you definitely can. But setting up Cloudflare is one of those things that's pretty easy, comes standard with most MediaTemple hosting packages. And all you have to do with Cloudflare is enter an IP address. Type it in, say block, and it'll go through the process of evaluating that and blocking that IP address for you. So you do have the ease of using a service like that, and there's a lot less of a learning curve. Plus, they also have services where they block. They can make an assumption based on your traffic if this person's being, belligerent or abusing your site.
Yeah, it's not clear to me, because I use Cloudflare too, but it's not clear to me the delineation between what they do for you automatically and what you pay for. It's a little piece that's a little fuzzy to me right now.
Yeah.
And it probably shouldn't be, and I should look into it more.
I think one of their biggest things with their paid service is the support for SSL and for multiple domains and that sort of thing. But I would have to look at their service offerings.
I think the primary thing for paid as well is the number of page rules you get. So page rules allow you to say, in Drupal it's important because you need to tell Cloudflare basically ignore /user and ignore /admin pages as well as node add pages. You don't want Cloudflare caching all that stuff. You only allow, on a free account, you only allow 3 page rules, which isn't quite enough. You can generally get away with it on lower traffic sites or sites that only the admins are interacting with the site. But on a bigger site, you typically need more. And I think the first level paid gives you 17 page rules or something, which usually is more than enough.
The key with Cloudflare is that there's a big jump there. So you go from the free to maybe the $20 or $30 a month. A branch, and then you quickly jump from that to like the $200 a month kind of service, which is automatic. I think the key there is the automatic DDoS attack.
Yeah, so they'll mitigate certain low-level DDoS attacks and prevent malicious behavior. But if you're actively being attacked by somebody and you need them to step in and fix that, you need the $200 a month account.
Right. So that's something you can do. That's completely, if you have a Cloudflare account set up for a customer, and let's say you're at the free level or even the $30 a month level, there's a way that they're in between you and the customer now. So there is an easy way in case you are really being abused through a DDoS attack. There is a way to take care of that with some money, basically, right? You throw some money at the problem, and it generally would go away.
And Cloudflare is one of the leading companies for that. I mean, they're known for it.
All right, so let's talk about some of the other solutions. So maybe let's hit the form side first. So it's the first thing we mentioned in the show here, where we're talking about people either registering on your website for the registration form, or maybe some web forms, contact us forms, that kind of thing. What are the strategies to mitigate just the crap that comes through there?
So there's 4 really common modules used for removing bots, and typically unwanted users are bots, from removing bots from being able to access your forms. Those 4 are Malum, Honeypot, CAPTCHA, and reCAPTCHA. There's advantages and disadvantages to each. Malum.
You know what, Nick? Let's take them not in the list that we have here, but in the order that you would strategize implementing them when you had a problem. So what's the first thing you would do when you see a problem? And I'm not sure it would be Malum. That's why I'm just bringing this up.
It depends on the kind of problem.
Okay.
So if you're having a problem on, for example, your user form, you're getting 30 registrations an hour, 40 registrations an hour.
From China.
From China.
Yeah.
Generally, my first solution is Honeypot.
Mm-hmm.
And Honeypot will just discard it right off the bat if it gets filled out too quickly.
So what does Honeypot do? So
Honeypot adds a hidden field to every form, and it's very easy to set up across all forms, and then sets a time delay. If somebody fills out the form in under X amount of time, they're most likely a bot, and it just discards that email, and then requires a longer time the next time somebody tries to fill it out.
So someone comes to the website, and let's say they're a super typer. The default, I think, is 5 seconds for Honeypot. So if someone fills out the form in less than 5 seconds, they're considered going into their spam, which makes sense. I mean, bots probably do this in way under 5 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So then when they hit submit, they're then put into a mode with Honeypot that says, hey, you need to wait X number of seconds in order for you to hit submit and try it again.
Yep.
That's what Honeypot does, and it does it very well.
Yep.
And by default, Honeypot will set this thing up to work on all forms on the website, regardless of anonymous or logged in or authenticated users.
Yep. And you can bypass it with certain authenticated users. So
with permissions.
Yep. Exactly. However,
so that's a good first approach, right?
Yeah, generally.
Would you go out and say that honeypot would be something you should install at the beginning, or wait until you have an issue?
I think honeypot is a default install for me now. The only time I remove it is if there's so we had to remove it on the NetCamp site because people had hit it enough that legitimate customers were getting banned for inordinate amount of times.
We had weird stuff going on with that site though, because and Nick is mentioning the New England Drupal Camp website. We had people that were hitting it, and Honeypot was telling them, "You need to wait 30,000 seconds in order to resubmit this again." I mean, there's some strange stuff going on.
Well, so here's the reason though. So Honeypot, the first time you do it, says you need to wait 6 seconds. If you try again within 6 seconds, it adds an additional 50%. So it'll say 12 seconds, then 24, then 36.
Yeah.
What I
punishes you for not paying attention to the directions.
Yeah, so what probably happened is there was more than one person on the same IP address trying to register, or they had some sort of bot on their IP address that was trying to register, and it just hit it a few times in a row very quickly, and they ended up just getting banned for a very long time.
Right.
That is something to think about when setting up one of these strategies is how are people accessing your website, because there have been instances. Actually, funny, at DrupalCon Austin, they had this problem where everybody was coming to the DrupalCon Austin website from 1 or 2 IP addresses, and the flood controls for Drupal were activated, and nobody could log in because they were basing it on that person's IP address. So when you're implementing one of these options, you have to think about how your users are accessing your website. We actually work with an insurance provider in the United States, and one of the things that we had to think about when dealing with user login and how many times they could log in before they got blocked from the system was, well, if everybody in this office building works for this company, chances are they all have the same health care. So if they all or a couple of them decide to go to the website and try to log in, and they have a problem, they can't remember their password, they get they get blocked. Well, now everybody in that building, because they're all coming to the site from the same IP, have been blocked. So it's something to think about that you might not think about it off the bat, and I'm pretty sure Honeypot does IP-based blocking. Is that true?
Generally, yeah.
So that's something that could be a problem depending on how many of your users are coming from the same IP address.
You need to be careful. Like piggybacking on that a little bit, John, is that if you're using something like CloudFlare and you don't have CloudFlare configured properly, every user is coming from the same IP address.
Yeah, or Varnish or Squid or
some other kind of when you're using something in front of your website for caching or these purposes, if you're not, I know particularly with CloudFlare, if you're not configured properly, CloudFlare will not pass on the user's IP address, but pass on their IP address. So you see all the traffic coming from 4 IP addresses. Yep. Because Cloudflare might be hitting 4 places, and you might have 10,000 different IPs, but they all come into you as one.
And that's a great instance to also think about how you're piggybacking these services. Right. If you're using Cloudflare and you're using Honeypot, you could be artificially creating a problem for yourself.
Right.
Because Cloudflare is should be doing a pretty good job of blocking these types of users. So Honeypot may be overkill, or just check your configuration. Make sure that the user's IP address is coming through instead of Cloudflare's.
So the next module in line that I typically take a look at is Malum. This has some significant advantages as well as some significant disadvantages. Probably the primary thing is Malum is very good at providing a CAPTCHA in challenge if somebody's having trouble logging in. So if somebody just if somebody gets marked as a bot, instead of having to wait 6 seconds or realize if there's a message, they just get a CAPTCHA. It's also really, really good at doing the sort of filtering that Honeypot can't do, and that is profanity or inappropriate content filtering. So if you have open comments on a blog, Malum can scan that content for certain keywords and block it or put a CAPTCHA if it's putting up inappropriate stuff. Another advantage is it's co-owned by Dries and Sun, I believe. So it was written by Drupal people primarily for Drupal. Probably the biggest disadvantage, though, is that, again, was mainly discovered on the NedCamp site, is Malum doesn't have a default way to add to every single form. You have to have a couple of Malum hooks in custom code written to expose Malum to every single form.
So that's one of the reasons why Malum's not one of my top choices. Malum takes a lot of configuration and can potentially take a lot of setup. After Honeypot, my go-to is usually the CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA module. And I'm leaning actually nowadays more towards the reCAPTCHA module. I'll explain why in just a minute. But basically what the CAPTCHA module does, let's talk about that one first because it's the we'll say the parent module. Basically, it gives you the option to add a CAPTCHA to forms on your website. So you can add a CAPTCHA to your user login, you can add it to web forms. Basically anything that uses the Forms API, you have the ability to add a CAPTCHA to. CAPTCHA gives you options for an image CAPTCHA versus a number equation CAPTCHA. So there are a couple of different methods that you can actually use there as challenges. It gives you some configuration as to how the CAPTCHA should appear. But with reCAPTCHA, which is a Google property, reCAPTCHA was using images of house numbers and building numbers and that sort of thing to basically get you to authenticate that you're a real person. The reason I'm leaning more towards reCAPTCHA these days is because Google has actually come out with reCAPTCHA 2, version 2, which is basically a Google algorithm that runs on the form and can say instantaneously whether you're a human or a computer. And if it thinks you're a computer, it'll give you a challenge like, here are 6 pictures of pasta, or 6 pictures. 3 of them are of pasta. Pick the ones that are of pasta. So it makes reCAPTCHA a little bit more fun if it's necessary. The first approach there is for it to try to validate on its own, though. So,
hey, John, I've actually gotten that prompt myself. So are you saying that
you're a machine?
Thought
yes.
I was a machine? I've seen that probably 3 or 4 times in the past month.
Well, you can have it analyze, or you can also have it just put it out there always.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a setting.
It's similar to Malum.
Okay.
In that case.
But the reason I like these options, before I would go to a Malum solution is, one, Malum is a paid service, right? I'm correct.
Yes and no. There's a free version that gets you unlimited spam blocking, but only 100 valid submissions a day.
Yeah.
Which occasionally you hit, even because occasionally it has false positives where it lets something through that is spam.
Sure. So one is that Malum's a paid service, and the second one is that there's a level of setup there that is a lot more difficult. Granted, overall, Malum may be slightly less intrusive to the user, but I don't think, with using reCAPTCHA 2 and having it kind of automatically determine.
John, the only reason that Malum is less intrusive is that if it doesn't believe, it does an initial scan, If it doesn't believe you're intrusive, it doesn't do anything. It
Right.
only introduces its blocking after it thinks you are a potential hacker, right?
Right, and for all intents and purposes, the reCAPTCHA 2 does the same thing. If you let it analyze your computer, your traffic, or however it, it's another Google algorithm for us to try to figure out how it works. But
I think reCAPTCHA 2 always gives you some mechanism, but it changes the mechanism based on what it thinks you are,
not
right?
always. I've had
Okay.
instances where I've gone to forums and it's just said scanning. Okay, check mark. You're a person. Go for it.
Okay.
And I don't know if they're kind of linking up with Gmail and the fact that, oh, hey, you're logged into your Gmail account and I know that that's a valid account.
Right.
I don't know how they're going about verifying that, but
right.
yeah, there have been instances where I haven't had a challenge at all. It's just let me fill the form out.
Yeah, and I have to say that one of the reasons why I used to always go with Malum is it was easier to set up than CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA, although this was 3 or 4 years ago. And in recent versions, and having to set up CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA recently a couple times, they're both just as easy. I mean, it's just a matter of installing it, turning it on, getting the API key, and you're done.
Right. The one thing I would say with that, Nick, is to be sure that if you want to use the newest version of reCAPTCHA from Google, to be sure that you get the reCAPTCHA 2x module. The 1x module still uses the old reCAPTCHA. So if you want the newer reCAPTCHA, you want to get the 2x module.
Is that the current release or a dev release?
It is an additional supported release, I believe. Let me actually take a look at that right now.
Or are we talking about a library being downloaded?
No, we're talking about a project release.
Okay.
So, yeah, it looks like it is. Yeah, it's an other supported release. So it's a 7.2x as opposed to 7.1.12.
Is it green or yellow?
It's yellow.
Uh-oh. All right, so let's move on. So a couple of other things here. We got hacked. What is hacked?
So, yeah, so now we're starting to get into the, you have noticed that your server utilization has gone way up. As John had said, he noticed that one of his servers was sending out spam email. You've discovered it's not somebody external to the site, you think it's internal, and you want to determine if something has changed. The hacked module is a module that gives you access to some drush commands that will tell you if any core Drupal or contributed modules have changed. So what it does is it downloads the version that you have, so the version of Drupal, the version of the module, and then does a diff against the two and says, these files have changed. And it's a very good way. Generally, you want to run it offline, not on the production server. I mean, it's really not recommended to do against production. But it's a good way to very quickly see if there's something going on.
I consider it like a guideline, right?
Yeah. It's not
to look at. Yeah,
it's not foolproof. One of the biggest things it doesn't do, for example, is it doesn't check the files directory. So if you have something in the files directory, it's not going to find that. In the settings.php file, if there's something in there, it's not going to find that. But it's a very good way, very quickly see if something has changed. If you've patched something, it will certainly pick that up and say, hey, this file has changed. So again, just because something has changed doesn't mean that it's malicious. The next one is going back to that other category of unwanted users. That's a little bit different. It's not spam. It's not somebody hacking. It's not competitors, etc. And that is subscriptions. So Commerce License is actually a pretty cool module. It allows you to sell virtual products called licenses. The license can be set up for usually a particular period of time, and it can be set to provide a certain role in that period of time. So you can say, for example, I'm selling a pro account. they purchase the Pro account license. It gives them the license for a year or 2 months or whatever, and it grants them the role professional member. When that license expires, it removes the role from the person. So it's always the issue of people having access to content or services on your site that they shouldn't have access to if their subscription expires.
Ultimately, Nick, this is about role management, right? It's
typically
building your website with people getting access to the things you want them to get access to based on their roles.
Yep.
Which is ultimately one of the core features of Drupal, is that it's very strong with user accounts, user authentication, and the roles they have. And if you can build a site based on roles, something like commerce, license, and subscriptions allows you to control those roles automatically based on people paying you. But ultimately, it comes down to the point of, have you built your website around role management? So are features and functions turned on and off based on roles?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you can talk about the next ones.
Yeah, so the next couple of items we have here is blocked IP address and IP range. So when you discover, and you could at some point, that there is an IP address that is causing you aggravation and heartache, it's very easy to block it. So in Drupal core, in 7 anyway, there's already a module enabled called block IP, and if you go into the configuration in your website, you can type an IP address in, and that IP address will be blocked. They can't get to your website. I've discovered another module called IP range, which works very similar, except you can put a range of IP addresses in there. So to say, take everyone from 192.168.4 in all the subs below that, and say shut them off. So if you're getting abused by a set of IP addresses, it's a quick way to just turn them off. And what turn them off means for a block IP address is very early in the Drupal bootstrap process, it looks at the IP addresses, and if someone's being blocked, it turns them off from the website very quickly. So there's not a whole lot of activity on the website from them. They quickly get a message that says you do not have access to this website, which could come in very handy if you're getting a DDoS attack or really someone targeting you and abusing you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about maybe some custom solutions before we wrap up here.
So, I think this is going to go back to you a little bit, Stephen.
Yeah.
So one of the primary things is, if you're getting attacked, or you have, as John has said in the past, you have an API that's exposed to the public, you need to have good statistics for determining when you're under attack or having some of those problems. What are some methods that you've used for gathering that information?
So if anyone who's trying to build a website that has content that's out there for the general public and it's valuable content, there's always people out there who are trying to strip that content from you. So in Drupal, you can track any page access on your website. So you have the ability, if you want to take a look at any time someone accesses any page on your website, and you could track that content. You can track it by IP address, the page that they're on, the kind of thing that they're getting to. So if you're in a situation where you think people are trying to scrape content from your site or abuse the content you have the mechanisms in place to combat them, which is things like, hey, if someone comes to this website 15 times on this page over the next hour, I want to shut them off. And you can do that. I mean, every single click on the website is tracked. You can hook into those things and track that content and say at some point when someone has come to my website 15 times in the last 60 minutes, I'm going to tell them they've been there too long. And this show doesn't need to get into the details of how to do that, but that capability is there for you to prevent unwanted. These are unwanted, maybe hackers or users coming to your website, stripping your content, and you definitely have a way to combat them, and it works.
Steven, is there any functionality built in there for the scenario that I talked about? Where, say, multiple users from an office building are looking at your website?
No, it's IP. Unless you go beyond IP address, and I've never done that. So beyond IP address, you got session data available to you. So there's a different session for if you, me, and Nick are coming from the same office building. I have a different session cookie than Nick does that you do. So we see different stuff, and it remembers different stuff about us. So the capability certainly is there to make this session-based.
Yeah, but you can't block session-based. You can only block IP-based.
Well, I mean, if there's a correlation,
not necessarily, no.
If there's a correlation there, you can go down the stack and then back up the stack and block said IP.
I would definitely imagine, Nick, that I could block session-based stuff. I've never tried to do it, but I would imagine that you could do that.
Okay.
Because it's a piece of data that identifies the user.
Yeah, but I think what you could be looking at there, and not to get overly technical, but is if you're looking at different sessions and different, from the same IP address, you could potentially be looking at legitimate traffic. So, it goes back to the beginning of the show where we were talking about being more analytical about your data and kind of figuring out how you need to block people.
Yeah, and I do think that at some point in sites that are public and are getting significant traffic, that at some point you're going to start looking at these things. I mean, because it comes down to you're paying for hardware resources and network resources, and when you start to look at these things and see that you could be abused, like if you have 25 or 30% abuse on your website on traffic, that's a significant cost for a company in general. So spending time to look at some of these things could be impactful to the overall success of the business.
Absolutely.
It's a little abstract, but I mean, when you get to this point of looking at those things, it's actually quite important. And as a web developer, these are practices you could build into the solutions you do moving forward too. Once you start to understand that there are these abuses going on, and I think if you start to look at your analytics closely, any website, you'll start to see way more traffic that's not legitimate than you think there is. And we all love to see those numbers move up every month, and I think in a general analytics fashion where, we've grown 10%, I think that's all legitimate. But if you really look at that 10%, there's probably a percentage every month that is people that you don't want on your website or shouldn't be there. Okay, so I guess we'll get to our last category here, which is cleanup. How do you clean this stuff up? So, and this really comes into just a couple of areas. One is if you've been abused on your registration page, chances are you could have 10, 20, 30,000 user accounts that aren't legit. How can we get rid of them? I mean, is there a way to get rid of them?
Yeah,
this point is to the person who found out the abuse long after it was happening, which has happened to us on the NedCamp site, right? You can be frank about that. I mean,
well, it doesn't even have to be long after. I mean, we found it, but
it was only a couple of days, but a couple of days was a lot of abuse, right?
Yeah, and there's a few different options. One is manually going through, which I did the first time NedCamp was getting the spam accounts. And it took me about 45 minutes of clicking to get rid of everything. Right. So sometimes that's feasible. Sometimes that's the best way. Other times, it's just a matter of trying to find something that differentiates them and running a query that just deletes everybody from the email address, sell guccibags.com, and then you can just get rid of them. But typically, if it's widespread spam, it's going to be very obvious to you. There's going to be no way to programmatically get rid of it, so you'll end up just having to go through it manually, or deleting a certain period of time, saying, okay, anything that came in between these days and these days that wasn't from me, get rid of it. And that's kind of all you can do.
Right.
So, not much to do there.
Not much to do there. Okay, and content too. So the other point here is content created by people that shouldn't have been. So you can always basically look at content by users and try to track that stuff down and get rid of it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so deleting users, if it's a spam user, there's an option to delete all the content that they created as well.
Exactly. Yep.
So, which is useful.
All right. So, any other unwanted users content that we want to talk about today? Anything else?
Nope.
Do you guys feel like this is a constant battle for you, or something that just comes up every once in a while?
Comes up every once in a while. I don't know that it's a constant battle. Maybe it's because we're implementing solutions like Honeypot and reCAPTCHA, out of the gate. But definitely not spending a lot of my day trying to battle these problems.
Yeah, it's something that you always do something to mitigate it, because if you didn't, it would be a constant battle. But it's typically something that comes up every few months, and you have to do some additional work. But it's not something that I'm seeing every day.
Okay. Wow. All right. Good. Glad for you guys. All right. So let's move on to the module of the week. What do we have there this week? We have the module is role assign.
Yeah, role assign is a great module. Goes along the lines of that permission set capability that we were talking about. So the scenario behind this one would be that you have a site admin, and within Drupal they want to be able to create users. Well, you as the site builder don't want to give that site admin the authority to just go in and have full access to users and to create and delete and so on and so forth. So this actually gives you the ability to, this module gives you the ability to select roles that a certain user of a certain role can grant to other users. So you would go in and you would say, I want user A to be able to grant roles A, B, and C. And then user A would log in and say, oh, I want to create a new user. When they go to create the new user, they would be given options A, B, and C for roles that they're able to assign out. It's really great in giving users that capability, but kind of keeping them out of all of the other nuts and bolts that are permissions and role assignments.
So John, it's a way for you to let your customer assign roles that you've allowed them to assign.
Exactly.
And they're not getting access to the Drupal permissions page, basically.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Great. Nice module. I've used it, but nice module.
It's pretty cool.
Yep. All right. Awesome. All right, guys, I think we've come to the end of the show. I need to ask this question. I'm going to go off our agenda a little bit because I'm just curious. So in the past couple of weeks, we've had announcements from Google. They had the I/O conference a couple weeks ago. We had the Apple's Web Developers Conference last week. Just curious from you guys, from the mobile phone world, anything interesting you guys have seen that you're excited about from any of the announcements in the past few weeks on the mobile side? Just curious. And I just threw this out there, so I'm catching
not
you
really.
off guard.
I mean,
not really. Okay, all right, that's a valid answer.
I'm interested to see what iOS 9 as an iPhone user. I'm interested to see what iOS 9 has in it to see how the enhancements to Siri compare. I tend to use Siri a lot. I know a lot of people that I talk to are like, "Oh, Siri's garbage. I never use Siri." But I tend to use Siri a lot, and I'm eager to see how much better Siri gets with iOS 9. I'm also interested to see how the SDK for the Apple Watch allows developers to kind of get in there and be able to create apps for that. So those two things are something that I'm kind of looking forward to. I'm also, if anybody from Apple happens to watch the podcast, I'm also waiting for the 15-inch MacBook Pro to come out with all the cool new features of the 13-inch. So if they could hurry that along, that would be really beneficial.
Hey, John, I'm a bit curious about your use of Siri because I've been primarily an Android user, as you know, for the last 3 years, and loved their voice interaction. I've been using an iPhone for the past couple of weeks, and I'm just curious, what are the things about Siri that you use? Like, do you pick up your phone and say, hey, do you tell it to make phone calls for you? Do you tell it to send a text message, etc.? Do you do those things?
Yeah, so I use it in two different, very distinct ways. When I'm driving, I'll use it to make a phone call.
Yeah.
Hey Siri, call, Laura's cell phone. Okay, fine. I'll also use it to reply to text messages while I'm driving. Siri, read that text message. Siri, reply with XYZ, or I'll be there in a minute. I also use it for reminders. I use the Reminders app on my iPhone pretty regularly, and it's a lot easier for me to say, hey Siri, set a reminder for tomorrow at 3 p.m. for me to do this, or Siri, set a reminder to take out the garbage. It's a lot easier for that sort of stuff than to
you actually use these things, not theoretically. You actually use them.
Yeah, these are real life use cases. I've also had Siri create calendar entries for me. Math, if I'm driving and I need to do some math for something, it integrates with Wolfram Alpha, so you can do, like, the other day I was trying to figure something out. It was like a 12% increase to like $210, and I was like, oh, what is it? And Siri was able to tell me. So things that I don't really want to interact with my phone about all the time, I'll ask Siri, hey, where's the nearest, Target? Where's the, whatever, just random stuff.
Interesting. All right, I think we'll talk more about this in the future. So let's wrap up today, guys. So John Picozzi, where can people find you, talk to you, interface with you, or complain about you?
Complain about me? Oh, man. You can find me at John Picozzi on all the social networks. And you can find me always on at umthink.com. Check it out. Check out our redesign progress, and there's some blog posts on there to talk you through that. So.
I've been watching that closely.
Good.
So, interested in it. So definitely go to Umthink, and you can see that progress there. It's fascinating. Fascinating to me anyway, so maybe not to everyone, but I'm watching it closely. So, Nick, how about you?
You can find me online at Nixvan, N-I-C-X-V-A-N, pretty much everywhere, and at enlighten.net.
Awesome. And neither of you guys differentiated between complaining about you or just talking nicely about you. So you can reach out to you in either case, right? Doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Okay. And for me too.
I love hearing people bitch to me on social media.
I expected you did.
My favorite pastime.
All right, and you can bitch about me at Stephen Cross on Twitter with a PH. Also, you can find me at parallaxinfotech.com. And guys, thank you for episode 97. And in 4 weeks we have 100, right? So
with a special guest. Stay tuned.
Yes. Woo. That's right. Stay connected. Anyway, see ya. Take care.